There is a man in Ohio who tracked every single dollar he spent for 11 years straight. Every coffee, every tank of gas, every $2 tip at a diner he visited exactly once. He built spreadsheets so detailed they had subcategories for subcategories. He knew to the cent what he spent on dental floss in 2019. He was also drowning in credit card debt the entire time. That is not a joke. That is the story of modern budgeting, and it is far more common than anyone wants to admit. We live in the golden age of personal finance content. There are apps that sync to your bank account in real time. There are 52-week savings challenges, zero-based budgeting frameworks, envelope systems, the 50-30-20 rule, and an entire cottage industry of influencers who will explain, with great enthusiasm and matching spreadsheets, exactly how you should be allocating your money. And yet, American household debt hit $17.3 trillion in 2024. The average credit card balance is over $6,000. Nearly 40% of Americans say they could not cover a $400 emergency without borrowing. Something is not working, and the uncomfortable answer is that the problem was never really about budgeting at all. Let's go back to where this whole thing started. The modern concept of personal budgeting was largely invented by the post-war middle class. Before World War II, most Americans did not budget in any formal sense. You spent what you had. Credit barely existed for ordinary people. If you ran out of money, you stopped buying things. The math was brutal but simple. Then came the 1950s. The economy exploded. Mass production created an avalanche of goods. Suburban homes, new cars, refrigerators, televisions, all of it suddenly within reach, and all of it suddenly being marketed directly at people who had never owned any of it before. And for the first time in history, they also had access to consumer credit. That combination, surplus income, easy credit, and an explosion of things to spend money on, created a problem that had never really existed before. Not poverty, this was something new. The problem of the person who earns enough, spends too much, and cannot figure out why. Budgeting was the solution the culture invented. Write it down, track it, control it. The only problem was that nobody questioned whether tracking was actually the same thing as controlling. Here is how budgeting is supposed to work. You calculate your monthly income, you list your fixed expenses, you estimate your variable expenses, you add them up. If the total is less than your income, you're fine. If it's more, you cut something. Simple, clean, logical. And in a world where human beings were purely rational, it would work perfectly every time. But here is what the research actually shows. A study by the American Psychological Association found that the act of budgeting activates the same stress responses in the brain as other forms of deprivation. What this means, practically, is that budgeting can feel like dieting, and diets, as most people know from personal experience, fail far more than they succeed, not because people are weak, but because restriction, sustained over time, tends to produce rebound behavior. You deprive yourself for 6 weeks and then spend $300 in a single weekend because you deserve it. The budget said no for too long, and then the budget lost. This is the mechanics that nobody in the personal finance industry wants to explain in detail, because the explanation is bad for business. Now let's talk about the math that makes this worse. Inflation between 2020 and 2023 ran at rates not seen since the early 1980s. The purchasing power of a dollar fell by roughly 17% over 3 years. This means that a budget built in 2019, even a perfect budget, executed flawlessly, would have produced a deficit by 2022 without a single change in behavior. You didn't spend more, everything just cost more. Housing costs in many American cities have doubled in the last decade. Childcare costs have risen faster than inflation. Health insurance premiums have risen faster than wages for over 20 years. These are not line items that respond to budgeting discipline. You cannot cut your rent through willpower. The famous latte factor, the idea that eliminating small daily expenses would unlock serious wealth, was coined in 1999. The math worked better in 1999. A cup of coffee was $1.50. A one-bedroom apartment in Austin cost $700 a month. The latte stayed roughly the same. The apartment has not. So what actually works? Studies on successful long-term savers show a pattern that looks nothing like traditional budgeting. They do not track every expense. Many of them cannot tell you what they spent on groceries last month. What they do instead is automate. They set up systems that remove the decision entirely. The savings transfer happens on payday, before they see the money. The retirement contribution is deducted before the paycheck arrives. There is no willpower involved because there is no decision being made. The psychologists call this friction reduction. We do what is easy. We do what requires the least resistance. And the genius of automation is that it makes the right financial behavior the path of least resistance. You don't need to decide to save. It already happened. But there is a deeper problem that automation doesn't solve, and it's worth naming directly. The reason personal finance has become an industry is that it is far easier and far more profitable to sell individuals a solution to a structural problem than to address the structure itself. When wages grow slower than housing costs, the solution is not a better spreadsheet. When healthcare eats an increasing share of every paycheck, regardless of behavior, the solution is not a 50-30-20 split. Budgeting, as a cultural practice, has become a way of placing the responsibility for structural economic failures entirely on the shoulders of the individuals those failures affect. If you are struggling, the implied message is you are not disciplined enough. You need a better system. Track harder, cut more, sacrifice longer. And that message is very, very convenient for everyone except the person receiving it. So here is the question that stays with you after the spreadsheet is closed. If the people who are most disciplined about budgeting are still carrying debt, and if the structures that determine most of the financial outcomes in a person's life are largely outside their control, then what exactly is all this tracking for? Maybe the act of paying attention to money creates a kind of financial awareness that changes behavior at the margins. Maybe small decisions do add up over long enough timelines. Or maybe budgeting, as we practice it, is a very elaborate way of feeling in control of something that was never really in our hands to begin with. The man in Ohio still has his spreadsheets, every cent, 11 years. He just took out a personal loan to cover his tax bill. The data was perfect. The system just didn't work.